A very good evening, a warm welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine, presented by Pick and Pay, and a warm welcome once again to our temporary set as the Dan Really Likes Wine cellar has some minor adjustments and modifications being made to it. And before we kick into a week and a night of celebration, and what great celebration it is, a quick thank you once again to everybody at the Element House team who joined us for a very special launch of the Element last week. Which was fantastic. Great wine, great evening, great crowd. If you missed it, we did do a live show from Element House, which included not just Erica Obermeyer, the winemaking genius responsible for the Element. We also had Manny Cabello, and Wave Colifson, the sommeliers at Element House, and then three great wine personalities in Steve Steinfeld, Christian Eads, and Maylu Lambert joining us as well. If you haven't seen it, it is still online, well worth a watch. Great discussion, a beautiful, beautiful place with some wine that seems quite at home in the quiet luxury of Element House. So that was last week, and a good week it was. This week is a busy one. On Thursday night, we'll be coming to you live from Plaisir de Merle, down for the relaunch under the new ownership of Rose and Michael Jordan, adding to their Bartony property. And plenty more great wine stories coming up over the next few weeks. But tonight we raise a very, very large glass of Stellenbosch Cup Classique, followed by 5 other glasses of great Stellenbosch wine, because Stellenbosch Wine Routes on Friday turned 50. 50 years of bringing people from not just around South Africa, but around the world into one of the world's great wine capitals, and celebrating incredible people, beautiful wine, wonderful stories, and giving us what is one of the most iconic wine destinations on earth. And it's one that has weathered the worst of the pandemic, and I've got no doubt will come through stronger and play a big part in keeping the town of Stellenbosch in high spirits. It is, of course, the Stellenbosch Wine Routes, and it was founded 50 years ago by just 3 estates. I think there are over 100 of them now, but just 3 estates back in 1971 thought that creating this collective wine route would be a marvelous idea. And well, thank God they did, because look what it has given rise to. And so we welcome on those 3 estates who 50 years ago came up with this idea for the very first Stellenbosch winery. Those estates, in no particular order, were Delheim, were Simonsig and Spier. And we've got a collection of wine luminaries from those 3 estates with us. So Victor and Nora are here with us from Delheim. Johan Malan here from Simonsig, and Jacques Erasmus here with us from Spier. Guys, a very warm welcome and congratulations. Are we still floating on a cloud of good wine after the weekend celebrations?
Thanks. Good evening, Dan. Thank you very much for having us.
Oh, it's great. Great to have you all on, and thank you very much for joining me. I'm feeling proud as a South African and as a member of the wine industry that you guys are celebrating 50 years. So I can just imagine how you guys are celebrating. And probably, Johan, you almost more than most, given that you're also celebrating 50 years of Cup Classique. So Simonsen's got extra reason to be dancing through the streets. Was that a coincidence that 50 years ago the wine route and Cup Classique started at the same time, or was there some cunning behind it all?
Dan, I think both the ideas originated on the same trip my father had with my mother and Neil Joubert and his wife. They were touring through Europe at the time, and in France they visited Burgundy, where he saw the sign Route de Vin, and said to Neil, why didn't we do this in Stellenbosch? So that was the birth of the wine route idea. And I think the idea of the Kaapse Vonkel, the first Cup Classique in South Africa, came from Champagne, because I think his frustration was that there were so few different grape varieties available in South Africa at the time, that he had to do something with the Chenin Blanc, which he had, in order to create something completely different, to enhance the offering that he had to his customers.
Well, it was clearly an inspired trip, because half a century on, we're celebrating those bright ideas. Nora, 50 years of the wine route. Give us a sense of Delheim's part in this wonderful slice of South African wine history.
Yeah, I think Victor and I was 2 years old. Victor was 3 at the time. So I think Johan will remember a few more things, but I went and dug out a few newspaper clippings that come from back then. So it sort of gives you a sense of what the wine route was. You can have a look here. This is 1973. We were 19 farms, but 1971 there was 5 wine farms. I believe the next year there were 9 wine farms, and then 19. And you can see the wine route literally just went around Bottleray and back via Spier and into Stellenbosch. So from back then, where maps were the essence of the wine route, and Victor and me were reminiscing last week about how we had to stand on the road and put the signs up for Delheim because no one knew where to turn off. So we've had our fair share of being part of the growing up of the wine route. And remember, Victor was saying how I can't remember that, how we had to run away from the police when they saw us with the sign up on the road. So yeah,
we even got tips from the people driving in because I felt sorry for us.
Victor, Victor, if you look at what you have now, because the Stellenbosch wine route is as fine a wine route as any in the wine world, and then you go back then, do you think, maybe not yourself as a kid, you might not have been thinking quite that far ahead, but certainly the founders, do you think they would have had any idea that vision of just the 3 getting together for some sort of cumulative effort would have mushroomed and grown into what we see today?
Yeah, it's quite amazing, and I think that at the beginning it was all maps and booklets for information. Today you can do the whole wine route on Google Earth and Google, and I think the wine route itself has to adapt with that and adapt with the new generation and how they experience the wine route these days. The times where the fathers used to arrive here with their kids and come and tell us, yes, this is where we got drunk as students when we were at Marty's at Delheim, has changed a bit. The students are now looking for different experiences in different places where they can get wine tastings for free. We quickly, or my father and them had to quickly solve that problem as well in the past, because wine tastings did start free, and the students obviously in the student town just thought, what a lucky tasting that is to have a free tasting on a Friday afternoon and hang around Spier's beautiful lawns. Was all good and well, but it also cost a lot of money. And the other side, you say it was an experience to be there. And these days we have to probably, after 50 years or so, don't get stuck in what we have inherited, but carry on innovating and keeping it fun and good for the new generation.
Jacques, if we look at Spier's role in all of this, I think you've been a flagship estate in terms of innovation, of creating more than just the wine, and you've done so much, speaking to a lot of the areas that Victor's just spoken of. How important has that community of wine estates, the collective wine route, been for Spier in terms of growing over the last 50 years to become this extraordinary wine tourist magnet that it is today?
It's still very important for us to have every Saturday or in a week of people there that enjoy wine and buy wine. I just wish the founders, when they started to plan to make the R44 a little bit bigger for the traffic. But it's good to be part of the history, and I hope for the next few years it will be the same.
Well, it's a difficult time we're emerging from, but I like to believe that the future is bright, and we're certainly celebrating that future as much as we are the past 50 years. And we're doing so with 6 different wines across 3 estates, 6 iconic wines that reflect so much of each of the 3 estates this evening. We kick off, unsurprisingly, with a glass of effervescence in the form of the Cop Sauvoncle. Jan, I know we're going to be doing some stuff with you later on this year when we more officially celebrate 50 years of Cab Classique, but it is such an iconic part of the Stellenbosch story, of the Stellenbosch wine route, coming through to Simonsig, having a glass of that very, very first South African Cup Trophy?
Yes, I think it's difficult for people to realize nowadays how different things were at the beginning, and how underdeveloped the whole wine drinking culture was in South Africa, and how much education that had to be done to create more awareness of wine, because at the time most of the wine in South Africa was made by cooperatives, and very few private producers or wine estates actually had their own label. And that started to grow from a very small base in the late 60s. And very soon, people like my father and Spat Sperling and Niels Joubert and David van Velden of Overgouw realized that it's a very difficult thing to find the customers and how to sell the wine. So that was one of the driving forces behind the Wine Route 2, is that it would open the cellar doors and make these beautiful Cape Dutch wine farms accessible to the consumer, and invite the people in to come for a tasting. So the story with the Kaapse Vonkel is also that actually all of the sparkling wine made in South Africa at the time was made according to the carbonation method. So almost like a soda stream, you just compress the carbon dioxide into the wine. So the whole concept of doing a bottle fermented méthode champenoise was unheard of, and there was not always the understanding from the consumer side, why is it so much more expensive? So every single bottle of Kaapse Vonkel initially was packed in a single bottle box, like a gift box, with a little brochure with pictures and the whole story of what is this bottle fermentation, or Cup Classique as we know it nowadays, and what does it involve, and how much better the end result is compared to the carbonated wine. So it's a very long story, but if one looked at the growth of the category of Cup Classique in South Africa, over the 50 years, there are now more than 200 winemakers doing this style of wine, and the category is really growing in popularity all the time, and it has started to occupy a very important part of the South African wine market. So a true success story, and a complete pleasure that I was there, a little 12-year-old boy in the beginning, but to grow with the wine and to see how the evolution process went.
It's a wine and a topic and a subject we talk about for hours. We are going to do it in more detail later on this year as we continue to celebrate 50 years of Cup Classique. But in particular, we celebrate 50 years of the Stellenbosch Wine Route today, and we've got people celebrating with us. Simon McLennan, cheers to Simonsig, raising a couple of glasses. Thanks, Simon. Nice to have you on the show. Skalk Stapelberg, cheers to the next 50 years. Skalk, our President King of Pinotage. Thank you, Skalk. Johan Van Eyck, cheers, Dan, or cheers to our guests, and cheers to the Stellenbosch team. And Melissa Sutherland, great choice as we kick off with that Cup Classique. And then our regular guest from Burgundy, Josephine Prière. Bonjour, Dan. Nice to see you, my dear friend Johan. I'm very glad to see Jacques. Big hello from Burgundy. 1991 was my first road of Stellenbosch Winery. So there we go, Josephine. Bon après-midi, comme d'habitude, bienvenue. Okay, so first wine is down, first estate is down. Let's head over to Spier and to Jacques and to his Chenin Blanc. What sort of challenges were there, Jacques, in terms of building up this wine route as you know it, and of getting people to kind of understand that this was a concept of going from wine estate to wine estate and making a day out of it?
I think also the wine changed a lot from 50 years back. We're sitting with old wine, heritage Chenin Blancs all over Stellenbosch, and we're making unique Chenin Blancs out of Stellenbosch area. Chenin Blanc is planted, the most planted cultivar in South Africa, and Stellenbosch play a big role in that part of. It's just great Chenin Blancs that come from that area.
one of which is yours. And of course, we celebrated it with the Standard Bank Chenin Blanc Top 10 last year, of which you were a very proud and worthy finalist. This is from the 21 Gables range. As we look at the history of the Stellenbosch Wine Routes, that's your history in particular. Why 21 Gables, Jacques? What does that refer to?
That's the Spier wine farm is almost as old as Stellenbosch itself, and it's the farm with the most gables, Dutch gables in the Stellenbosch area. So that reflects on the 21 gables that's on the farm, and the weight and the digits of the farm. That's where the name comes from. It's our flagship wine, the Chenin Blanc. Yeah.
All right, and it's one, as I say, that got that great award last year, one of many. It introduced us to this Chenin Blanc, and if you will, pick up from a conversation I had last week with Alistair Rimmer at Kleine Zalze, where we were talking about how it's not just a style of Chenin that speaks to Swartland or speaks to Stellenbosch or speaks to Paarl or speaks to Wellington, but within Stellenbosch itself, I'm certainly getting a real sense, and Alistair was of a similar view, that we can now almost compartmentalize the Chenin around Stellenbosch and get a sense of which particular style is coming from which particular corner of Stellenbosch. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, there's a big difference in styles from the Waterloo Hills to up to the Alderberg. We have our own farm there, and we planted now around 7 hectares of young vines there. And the wine's different totally. And as I said, the old wines is just much more better than the younger wines. And yeah, the area is so diverse. We keep everything separate in the cellar, and there's a huge difference between the wines and different styles. And we make also different styles in different oaks components. So we keep it as far as possible separate, and you later on get a recipe of which oak, which work best with which wine. And then in the end is the most important thing, the blending. Yeah.
Well, the blend that comes out is worthy of that 21 Gables title, and that's why it does win those awards. Victor, you're talking quite fondly and reminiscing about those early days as a kid helping out at Delheim. To what sense has the strength of you all really helped the individuals, and that somebody might stop in at Delheim, not that they'd heard of you before, but they'd been somewhere down the road and, oh, you must go and try Delheim, or vice versa, someone drops into you and asks for another recommendation. Is that a really strong part of what makes Stellenbosch Wine Routes so successful?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, what's nice with wine is you can't copy the other producer. And in the olden days, and still today, winemakers share all their stories or their, you could nearly say secrets, because we all have different terroirs. So I think that's why it also pulls together all these different farms, because really we can't compete with each other if it comes to individual style of making wine and different terroirs and different stories, different heritage. So it's like my dad said, it's not like you can have a discussion with friends and winemakers around a table about wine, but you cannot have that about Coca-Cola. And some other wine route, I think, made it possible, because we are not competing with each other and we're sharing the space together.
I do. I love that the sense of community that exists within Stellenbosch and within the wine farms, the wine estates, leads us rather nicely into the need to raise a glass to that subject and to the Grand Reserve. Nora, if you will, introduce us to this particular wine and why this is something that I know you are particularly proud of.
Then I'm gonna just kick you off with a story. I was also again reminiscing about the old days when, on a Saturday afternoon, it must have been early or late 70s, early 80s. I remember there were people who drove up here, and my dad had actually closed the wine tasting room, and the gentleman climbed out. He said he's coming to buy some Cabernet, and my dad looked at him and he said, red or white? And the gentleman looked at his wife and he said, just give us a case of each. So I think we've come a long way since then, but I'll never forget my dad joking about the fact that we were part of educating, and education played a big role in the wine industry, so we're very proud of being part of that. Victor was actually 12 years old when the Grand Reserve was launched. 1981 was the first vintage. So he's also grown up, like Johan has grown up with the Kaapse Funkel. Victor was as old as Johan was when the Grand Reserve was released. So maybe he can give you a bit of his story on that.
Yeah, I think my father bought the Vera Cruz farm opposite Kanonkop, especially for making these kind of wines. And I remember him taking me there as a little child on top of the hill there, where we planted a pepper tree when he bought the property. And the tree's still standing there, and he said to me, my son, on this property we're going to make some stunning red wines. Just look at the soil, this is unbelievable. And yeah, I think the Grand Reserve has been a good example of what we can make in South Africa as a border style wine. We have all the cultivars, but we don't always use all the cultivars in the blend. But also it was challenging that you, as a wine farm with Delheim with so much history, you have a base as Spatzendrake, as sweet wines, and now you're starting to do red wines, which is quite different to what the consumer was used to in those days. And like Nora says, some people didn't even know if it was a white or red. But Delheim can stand up proud to say that for 40 years we've been making Grand Reserve, and it is one of the first with Mielis and Welgemeend to be the first border style wines in South Africa. Because of the history of where Delheim came from, we were actually the first winery to make a dry white wine in South Africa, which is called Herenman at the time. So from Spatzendrake to Grand Reserve, it's taken 40 years to 50 years of changing, and I think that's where we have to change with what is new, what is in, what is happening, and I think that's where Simonsig and Spier and Delheim has always been innovating new ideas, just like Johan said about this Kaapse Funkel. That's where Grand Reserve was born.
We're going to chat about that.
Simonsig to make the Kaapse Funkel. We thought we'll go for Grand Reserve.
I think you both found your niche very firmly. We're going to try some of that Spatzendrake just a little later, which is also a wine with some terrific stories behind it. Just a final word from you both on this particular wine. We know 2015, we know it's sensational. We know 2015 Cab in particular out of Stellenbosch is telling a fabulous, fabulous story. This is a pretty famous wine. It's got a long and proud history. How do you feel this particular vintage, this 2015, racks up against some of the better ones in years gone by?
I think 15 is a fantastic vintage. Overall, it's for red wine, it was a very good vintage. I think the challenge that's come with these wines is that you couldn't make them like you used to make them 81. People these days want to drink wine sooner, but they also want to have the possibility of keeping wines longer. So the winemaking techniques have definitely changed, and also from a viticultural point of view, we've had to do a lot of work, especially that we have leaf roll virus in South Africa, and Cabernet is probably the cultivar that is most affected by leaf roll virus. So at the end of the day, it's the most challenging wine really to do. You want to have these really nice physiologically ripe grapes that bring in good fruit, good tannins, to be able to make these kind of wines. And once you have leaf roll virus in your vineyard, it becomes very difficult. Johan Krieger at Simonsig at Kanonkop always laughs and says, Pinotage you don't have that problem with, because it's an early ripening variety, so they don't have leaf roll virus. But I think anybody that can make wines like this, and I think Simonsig also makes some unbelievable cabs and also their blends. It's great to have these wines in Stellenbosch, and that we can own to be the Cabernet the kingdom, or location that really makes top Cabernet for South Africa. I think Grand Reserve itself, this one is 84% Cabernet. Cabernet stands up quite strong as a character in the wine. I think 15 was a very, very good vintage. 17 is probably the follow-up one to 15. 16 was a bit more challenging. But if wines didn't differ or vintages didn't differ, yeah, we could have been drinking Coke instead.
And of course, we've been doing anything but. We've been for 50 years drinking the Stellenbosch Wine Routes together. And our three founders are joining us on this very special episode of Dan Really Likes Wine, brought to you by Pick and Pay and being watched by a number of people. Johanni van Meulen throwing back to the Spier Chenin, a fantastic Chenin Blanc. There we go, Jacques. You've got an admirer. Melissa Sutherland, love the diversity of the Stellenbosch Wine Routes. Great cooperation, collaboration between like-minded competitors. Excellent international branding. I think that's a very good point, Melissa. Collectively, they do work so well for brand South Africa. Elizabeth Bardan, great conversation. Thank you, Elizabeth. Reginald Peckler up at Cheetah Plains in the Sabi Sands, talking of Cup Classique. I drink it when I'm happy and when I'm sad. 50 years of celebration to end Method Cup Classique feels like life surprise. Viva la bubbles as I savor the tears of joy. Cheers. Thank you, Reggie. Good to have you watching the show. And Michelle Straden, very simple to see where Michelle's heart is. Simonsig. And that's where we head back to and get back to Mr. Malan. And we go this time, Johan, to the France Malan. And before we drink the wine and try it, and I've got the 2014 with me here. Tell me a little bit about France Malan, because we see the name, we know the stories. We know the inspirational role and the visionary role played in South African wine. But what about France Malan, the person? Introduce him to us, if you will.
Yeah, the interesting thing is that he actually grew up on a wine farm in Wellington, where his father was the owner of the wine farm. And he was quite a forward-thinking man himself, because he said his son must go to Cape Town to go to school at Jan van Riebeeck. So I think that was already a very important role that the exposure to a city played in his life. And then after school, he studied winemaking at Stellenbosch University. And during his studies, his father passed away at the young age of 52. And he had an uncle who said to him, "France, you can always buy another wine farm, but you can never get your qualifications and your studies again. It's only once in a lifetime experience." So actually, I don't think that can hold any truth in today's world. But what happened is that they did sell the farm in Wellington, but fortunately for him, he fell in love with my mother, whose father happened to have a wine farm in Stellenbosch. So the Simonsig estate actually got into our family from my mother's side, and she was van Niekerk from the high up on the Simonsberg. That was the family farm. So after finishing his master's degree in winemaking, they got married, and he took over the farm in 1953. And for 10 years, he rented the farm from his father-in-law. So in 1964, I think by that time it was transferred to his name, and that gave him the collateral to go to the bank, and he bought a second vineyard, modernized the cellars in 64, but it was still selling it to the big merchants like Stellenbosch Farmers Winery, distillers, etc. And soon realized that the statutory minimum good wine price that was set by the KWV at the time was way too low for him to add value or to make ends meet. So he told me that at that time, the minimum good wine price was 9 cents a liter. And that spurred him on to start his own label. And that happened in 1968 when he released the first 3 Simonsig wines. It was a Steen, which we still do today, obviously nowadays labeled as a Chenin Blanc. And the other one was a Riesling and a Claret Blanche. And then a Pinotage followed, and a semi-sweet Chenin. And at that point in time, you know, he was selling it for 50 cents a bottle, which, if you look at the minimum good wine price, he was definitely adding a lot of value. But the progress was very slow, and it was a real uphill battle because the industry was so dominated by the big players, and wine drinking wasn't such a big thing in those days. So in that respect, the wine route definitely did a huge job to educate people about wine, and the fact that the Stellenbosch Wine Route was the first wine route in South Africa. They also did other innovative things, and the one thing that I can remember is that at that time in the early 70s, the first Boeing 747s or jumbo jets were acquired by South African Airways, and to experience this huge big plane, there was Stellenbosch Wine Route, then chartered jumbo jets, and so people could get onto the plane in Johannesburg, fly down to the Cape, and then they would be distributed amongst the members of the wine route in buses, and then they would visit the people on the wine route or the wine farms, and then have a braai or a lunch, and then when they get back to the airport, there was a case of wine that could fly back with them to Johannesburg. So if you think about it in that way, you can realize that how different situation was 50 years ago. But they made a lot of new plans. The Stellenbosch Food and Wine Festival is also the first of its kind in South Africa, and in the Stellenbosch Town Hall, which was, I think, over the years, also a trailblazing event every year in October. And that, I think, is a sign that things that we take for granted nowadays were invented and thought up by those early pioneers, and they worked really hard to expose more and more wine consumers to wine, which I think today many young winemakers who start up don't always realize the road has been paved by the older generation that did a lot of the hard work.
And it's hard work that has sustained well into the winemaking future as we see today. Melissa Sutherland echoing that. What great marketing it certainly is. Elmarie Rabi mentioning that the first meeting for members was held on the 23rd of January 1973. So going back just over 48 years. Lots of innovation. Frans Milan, clearly an extraordinary man, and a man you've chosen to honour with your Frans Milan red blend. Now, initially we all said, "Oh, Simonsig, you know, Cup Classique, that's what they'd use by way of celebration of France." Why did you go with the Cape blend?
You know, when South Africa started with the huge political changes in 1990, all of a sudden we started getting a lot of inquiries and visits from international wine writers and international buyers. And at one stage, I had a visitor who was a master of wine, and he said, well, let me go back a step. South Africa is perhaps more famous for Chenin Blanc than France, and of course the other one that we have available is Pinotage. And the one question that this master of wine asked me is, what can you blend with Pinotage? And that got me thinking, because in the late 80s, in 89, I thought, well, we always keep the new barrels for our Cabernets and the Bordeaux-style blends and Shiraz, but Pinotage was at that stage not the easiest wine to sell and maybe not the most popular. So I thought, well, what would happen if you take Pinotage and put it into a brand new French oak barrel? And that I did 2 barrels in 1989. And incidentally, my next door neighbor, Beyer Strutter, also did the same thing in 89 at Kanonkop. And the result was absolutely astounding. So when this visitor came around in 1991, I had some Pinotage in New Oak, and I had Cabernet and Merlot, and that led me to play around a little bit in the cellar. You know, you make a small bench sample and taste it, and the results were very interesting and definitely worthwhile following up on. So the first one, the blend I made was for the Cape Winemakers Guild of the 91 vintage, and the wine was a real success, also because 91 was a stunning vintage. And then by 94, I realized that maybe this is something that you almost stumble upon. It was a new style of wine, and the story is also that the Institute of Cape Wine Masters had a symposium in Cape Town, and they said, what is a typical South African blend? And this wine was tasted there, and it was received with a lot of enthusiasm. So I decided to say, okay, well, we've now got our Tiara, the Bordeaux blend, but maybe do this style of wine, which didn't have a name at the time, but used mostly Pinotage with some Cabernet Sauvignon and a little bit of Merlot. And then the wine was in the cellar, and I already had this idea that, you know, Frans Milan is the patriarch of the family, and also the one that basically started the whole Simonsig story. And this would be an appropriate way to pay tribute to his efforts. And I still remember so clearly when the label was designed, he didn't know that we're going to name it after him, and how pleased he was. So that's one of my great memories of my career as a winemaker, that when I revealed the wine that was named after him.
That's a wonderful, wonderful story, as it is a wonderful, wonderful wine. This is the 2014 Cape blend, so led by Pinotage and paying tribute to one of not just Stellenbosch's but South Africa's wine visionaries, the Frans Milan. Cape blend means Pinotage, and Pinotage means that we have a next wine to move on to, and that's just down the road. Let's head back to Spier and to Jacques. And Jacques, you have a wine here that is so quintessentially South African in the Pinotage. Is that something you find at Spier with your international tourists, that they're on the Stellenbosch Wine Route, they want that quintessentially South African wine, they want to try some Pinotage because that's what they know is for them the South African signature?
Yeah, I think we started back in 2010 with the 21 Gables range, and we made a decision. Stellenbosch is well known for cabs, and we actually at Spier we were strong categories cab Sauvignons, and we made a decision to go with Pinotage and Chenin Blanc because it speaks for South African heritage and the story of Pinotage. But I think Pinotage is a little bit more challenging in Stellenbosch than cab maybe. And this specific wine is very close to the Valsbaai area, and I think it's one of the vineyards that's closest to the ocean. So it's a cold area Pinotage. So it's not a typical style of Pinotage, but the story that speaks for itself. The wine is doing very well, and we're very proud of this wine of us.
You speak of the typical style of Pinotage. It's a slightly fluid space, though. It's a harder one to pin down than it might have been 10, 15 years ago, because the interpretation of Pinotage as we see it is a lot more flexible, and we're getting winemakers, I think, having a lot more fun with Pinotage, but also being able to dispel some of those old and not terribly positive impressions of Pinotage by now creating something that moves into different styles and allows Pinotage maybe just a little bit more expression.
Yeah, Pinotage, it's what I see about the cultivar is, I think previously maybe people didn't give enough attention to the vineyards. Pinotage is made in the vineyard. It's almost like a Sauvignon Blanc. It's if you get the fruit right in the cellar, it's easier, I think. So as I said, Stellenbosch is so diverse, so there's different styles of Pinotage in the area, and this is a colder area of Pinotage, so it's more fruit driven, and
Take us through then this particular one as I pour out my final wine, which I'll be drinking in just a moment, and that is your 21 Gables Pinotage. If it is made in the vineyard, as you say, to what extent are you able to direct it, to push it in the way in which you'd ultimately like to see it as a wine?
This is the 2016 vintage. So if you remember, this in the middle of the drought season. So it was an early picking that year. It was ripening early. But this, yeah. So what I mean by the management of the vineyard, we break out leaves so that the bunches is to get thicker skins, and then we sort the grapes in the cellars. Only the best berries will go to make the wine. So it's a lot of hard work going into to produce the wine like this. And then again, the aging of the oak is a little bit of 90% is French oak, a little bit of Hungarian, and a small part of American oak in this vintage. And yeah, and then just need time.
There we go. It's time that's paid. I think I had 3 or 4 different pinotages over the weekend, and I'm actually really enjoying some pinotage at the moment, which wasn't always the case. This is definitely one of them, and it is the 5th of our 5 wines. The 6th one we have takes us back to Delheim. Just before we do that, we've got information flying in from across the internet. Elmarie Rabi's fingers are about to set her keyboard on fire. The first wine festival held in the Stellenbosch Town Hall in 1973 with the Stellenbosch Gourmet Guild to promote the food and wine culture of Stellenbosch. The food was in the main hall and the wine in the little hall off to the side. From 1976, it became the Stellenbosch Food and Wine Festival, and wine was tasted in the main hall, and most of the food halls are moved to the little hall off to the side. So they realized the importance of wine far superseding the food and getting that sorted out. And I see Leanne Sutherland with her own fun fact, a competition to find the logo for the Stellenbosch Wine Routes in the 1980s produced an unusual result. Many entries were received, including 6 from Germany. The winner was announced in 1981 on the 10th birthday of Stellenbosch Wine Route, and the logo was adopted and trademarked. The winner, Stan Black, was from outside the region and was acting head of the arts department at the Cape Technicon. So well done, Stan Black, creating a little bit of history. I also see Elmarie Rabi mentioning that by 1977, both Delheim and Blauklippen had begun serving light meals such as cheese lunches and vintners platters. And Team Delheim, it really is a feature of the Stellenbosch Wine Route that, yes, there is fabulous wine, but it is the food, it is the art galleries, it is the mountain biking tracks, it's the pottery making. There is so much more to Stellenbosch Wine Route than just being a wine route.
Can you hear us, Dan?
I've got you.
Yeah, maybe we could just quickly explain in 1962, we were the first wine farm to open a tasting room, and 1971 was the start of the wine route. In 1976, we had the first cheese platter served by Ute Helmer. She was the wife of the winemaker. And my mom keeps saying, I was too young to remember. I don't remember how old Victor was, or if he can remember, but we weren't allowed to actually serve any food as a restaurant because we didn't have a kitchen that was tiled from the bottom to the top. We didn't have the venue where we were serving food fully carpeted. So we had to trade with food with a hawker's license, which gave us permission to have food made off-site, bring it to the kitchen, put it on a platter, and serve it to guests who were visiting at the time. So that's what we used until the 90s when things changed in South Africa. Delheim was always trading on a hawker's license. So that's the food story from here.
Wonderful little slices of history, which are being much appreciated. Angela Lloyd saying, Dan, this is a trip down memory lane for me. The Stellenbosch Wine Route has been part of my South African wine adventure since 1971. An amazing history of Cape Wine's development and improvement. Of course, Angela herself, such a part of the fabric of South African wine. And great to have you watching the show. Still by Kelders, great farms, wines from some of our favorite farms in Stellenbosch. So nice to have you guys along as well. And then a question here from Random Hat Communications, going back to a little earlier on, wanting to know who made the first Grand Reserve at Delheim. Ask Nora to share. Also, why the name? Enlighten us.
The first wine, the Grand Reserve, was made after a trip that my dad and I think Kevin Arnold at the time went to California and saw that they could make, using small barriques, wonderful red wine, and came back and they promptly started making the first Grand Reserve here on Delheim with 2 to 5 liter barrels. And the name was just between Kevin and my dad and deciding, just make a name that sounds the best of the best, which was a Grand Reserve. We do have an issue with a Grand Reserve when we export it because it's a registered trademark in Europe. So we always export it with a little bit of exception to the rule. And if we are not standing on every shelf in Europe, we're allowed to sell Grand Reserve in Europe.
The politics and mechanics of wine. You mentioned the name there. Let's have a look at the name of our fine wine. This is quite a storied bottle, this, the Spatz and Dreck. I think it was 1979. Decanter gave this worst wine label in the world. And I know initially it wasn't the greatest success that came about, but it really is an iconic South African wine. Talk us through the story from the, if not quite accidental, then certainly colourful beginnings of what's now become very much a South African and Stellenbosch favourite.
I think, Dan, if you ask all the clients who come here, everyone has a different story. So it's always wonderful to hear the different stories about the Spatz and Dreck. The closest truth of the story is one Sunday afternoon, my dad had a few friends over to launch his first wine that he personally made, 1961. And this was actually before he met our mother. And a good friend of his, Hila Geleense, she was Dutch. When they went to taste the wine in the cellar after they'd had a big party at the swimming pool, I'm not sure if that was tactically the wrong thing to do, because by that stage she had the nerve to tell him that she actually, when she tasted the wine, say the wine really tastes like Dreck, which is the Spatz and Dreck, born on a Sunday afternoon. He was very affronted by her directness and telling him that his wine tasted like, we always say, shit. And on Monday morning, a friend said, well, Spatz, why don't you take this and actually turn it into something positive and make a label from it? So on Monday morning, he went to Cape Town and phoned his friend Gunther Komnick, and Gunther designed the first label, Spatz and Dreck, with a sparrow because of our surname Sperling on top of a barrel, doing its droppings into the barrel. And it's probably still the ugliest label in the world, but we always, my dad always said, you're trying to kill the wine every time you say we're not making Spatz and Dreck anymore. But it's part of our history, it's where we came from. And I always say sometimes it pays to have honest friends who tell you what's really going on in your life and use it and make something from it. So that's where Spatz and Dreck came from.
And a fabulous, fabulous South African wine it is. It's got a very striking colour, and it forms part of that.
We changed the style in 2015 from being a late harvest to being a natural sweet. We could no longer compete on the market with Spatz and Dreck as a late harvest wine, and decided instead of killing the brand, rather make it a commemorative wine that people can buy on the farm and take home, and comes with a whole story and just something that's special for all of us, and not just another late harvest anymore. So Spatz and Dreck has changed in style, but as a far more serious wine for memory's sake. And we try and encourage people to come to the farm and enjoy the history with us when they do. So you'll have to come down to Stellenbosch and enjoy it with us. Then you can't sit in Joburg and try it.
When we relaunched it, Dan, we said, it has to go back. The original old label that won the ugliest label of the world had to go back onto the bottle, because it also changed over the years a bit. So that we dug out and we put back the original label that was had the honor of winning it twice.
Oh, good for you. I think it's a really cool piece of South African wine history, and I'm very glad that you did. And I'm very glad you're still making it, because South African sweet wines don't get enough attention. Gee, we make them well. As you guys make wine as a whole, and it's not just me and Nick Furness watching on YouTube at the moment. What a wonderful family. Sperling was an absolute treat. Just before we wrap up what has been a delightful celebration of the history of Stellenbosch Wine Routes over 50 years. I'm not sure, Johan, are you still with us? I think we had lost him briefly a moment ago. Johan, are you back?
Yeah, sorry, we had a bit of a problem with the internet, so I'm back here.
No problem. Elmarie Rabi from the Stellenbosch Wine Routes says, I must ask you a quick story about, but are you having fun? Spatz says, that's from Elmarie Rabi. What could she be talking about, Ms. Muller?
Yes, my father was really, really good friends with Wim Spatz, as I called him, and of course Niels Joubert. And I started as winemaker in 1982, and I remember the days when he would come and visit in the evenings, and they would have plenty glasses of wine, and I was always the little kid. And so when I entered the industry, one of the most memorable things that I remember what he said to me is because the wine industry looks very glamorous from outside, and but there's a lot of hard work and sometimes hardship going on behind the scenes. And it used to be so uncomplicated when they started. I can keep you busy with a couple of stories, but the one day he said to me, Johan, are we still having enough fun? And that sort of became one of the mottos in my winemaking career, because in the end, it's not about the medals and the awards and so on. It's a lot about the fun that you're having, and actually wine as an agricultural product is something that brings you close to the end consumer, which is not common of any other produce coming out of agriculture. And in that, you meet good people, you meet people who love wine, they love life, and there's food involved. So it's a whole lifestyle. So it's one thing that even in the hard times that we've been through, especially now with COVID and all the lockdown rules, it's something that I often have to remind myself and say, Wim Spatz said, are we having enough fun? And make sure you do.
Well, 50 years on, I think the spirit still lives on very clearly, certainly evident in all of our guests today. Just very quickly as we wrap up, Johan, just in a minute or so, 50 years time when we gather for a very special edition of the show. Where do you see Stellenbosch? Where would you like to see the Stellenbosch Wine Route? What direction would you like to see things going in?
Well, I think the wine situation in Stellenbosch has attracted a lot of interest from people from overseas, and they've added a lot of value in terms of investments and very high-end facilities and so on. But what I would like to see is that the families are still there, because not only does wine have a story to tell, every wine tells a story, but the influence and the involvement of the families would be very important to keep that authentic, and it's not just a corporate thing. If you look at the Antinoris in Italy, they've been there for 16 generations. We are probably now only on number 3 and 4. So that would be one of my dreams. And I think in terms of the wine itself and the wine route, I think it has done exceptionally well, and it is perhaps one of the most popular tourist attractions in South Africa. And may that be the case for the next 100 years. But also the fact that if you look at how the food and the wine came together at the Stellenbosch Wine Route, that if you look at the top restaurants that you can visit and enjoy the wines from that estate with world-class food, I think that is something that you don't really find in other wine regions over the world, because in South Africa, those restaurants are on the estates. And in Stellenbosch, sometimes up to 4 of the top 10 restaurants in the country are on Stellenbosch Wine Route farm. So that in itself, I think, is a feather in our cap.
It most certainly is. And just one more endorsement of this great stretch of wine delight. Melissa Sutherland saying, indeed, great installations, art installations at Spier, have happy childhood memories of the cheese lunch at Lanzerac and also the snook braai at Kanonkop. Well, the art is just part of that incredible Spier story. I almost hesitate to ask, Jacques, you guys have done so much already. If you're not racing cheetahs, you're creating incredible restaurants and holding concerts. What is next for Spier? What should be next for Stellenbosch Wine Routes as we look to the next 50 years?
I have to agree with Johan. For me, it's also important to keep the farmers planting vineyards. Stellenbosch is a difficult area to make wine. It's a quality area, not a quantity area. And as long as the farmers is involved and we plant vineyards and we have strong brands coming out of Stellenbosch, I see a good future. Spier is on board, and for us, everything is about the wine. The rest is not so important. We believe, we will strive to make better wine.
You're already making some pretty special wine, Jack, and we've seen that this evening. Last check-in to Team Delheim. And guys, already such a storied history, such a fun history, and so many great recollections just in our short time together this evening. The next 50 years, what do you feel it holds for Stellenbosch Wine Routes to make the most of what has been such an incredible first 50 years?
We need to have more fun, Dan.
Have fun for the year. If my father was the first one to do a wine tasting outside of the Western Cape, and that was a challenge on itself. I think if we can live in that spirit, that we're looking for new ideas and new things to do in the wine industry.
Well, you mentioned the fun, and Jan tapping into that brilliantly, but also there's been a real spirit of adventure and invention to our Stellenbosch wine estates, and as we bring everybody back up together on screen for the last time, yes, there are many estates who form such an important part of the Stellenbosch Wine Routes, and I know that you guys will be the first to acknowledge all of them as well. But you were the founders, or at least your families, your estates were, and you kicked off something really special for South Africa, but also for the wine industry right around the world. So thank you. I know the celebrations are certainly not done. In just a moment, I'll let you know what else we can look forward to through the rest of the year. But to Nora and Victor, Nora, I'm not going to email you to be on the show again by video link. I am going to come and visit you because you've shouted at me twice already. I get very intimidated, so I will be down. And Jacques and Johan as well. Johan, I know we're hoping to be down with you in the couple later this year. And Jacques, it takes much to get down to Spier. So keep celebrating, and thank you for coming together, for giving us the Stellenbosch Wine Routes and giving us so many wonderful stories tonight. I really appreciate it. So that's Delheim and Spier and Simonsig, your 3 founders of the Stellenbosch Wine Routes. Now, as I said, it is not done yet. Look, if you make wine, you're pretty much celebrating the whole time anyway. But there is more cool stuff to come. Elmarie Rabi confirming Stellenbosch Wine Route will be celebrating stories and people for 50 weeks. This is only the start. We're working on a 10-day celebration in August, a book launch in October, a fine wine conference in January 2022, and a super special harvest parade in February 2022. So keep a lookout. Stellenbosch Wine Route, their social media channels, their website, keeping you up to date. And being just a little bit cloak and dagger here, Elmarie saying, Dan really likes wine. Sharpen your braaibroodjies tasting skills. There's some surprises in store. That has got the signature of Mike Radcliffe all over it. He's obsessed with braaibroodjies. Couple of final comments. Elizabeth Bardan, love the story about the spirit of fun. It is so important, not just to wine, to pretty much everything we do, really. Grant Sauls, great lineup and stories as always, Dan. Well, that's thanks to my guests, and weren't they terrific this evening? And Angela Lloyd throwing back to the family comment from Johan. You're so right, Johan. Families matter in the wine industry. Well, we've seen some of those this evening, as we have seen Stellenbosch Wine Routes and its continued story 50 years in, going strong and getting stronger. Thank you all for joining us. Don't forget, if you aren't already, make sure you're a member of the Pick and Pay Wine Club. Send that Smart Shopper number to 36775, and that will get you into the Pick and Pay Wine Club free of charge, and gets you, amongst other things, 3 times the Smart Shopper points on all wines, including many great wines from Stellenbosch, as well as 20% off a whole pile of great deals. Look at some of these deals at the moment. Deals on Bosman, deals on wine out of the Pierre Jourdain range, that's Haute Cabriere, and a magnum of Beyersclough Pinotage, just 140 Rand in selected stores. Stellenbosch at its very best. Remember, on Thursday, I will be live from Plaisir de Merle, hosting the relaunch of the estate under new ownership. Rose and Michael Jourdain promises to be a glittering evening with some pretty good wine and the start of an important new chapter in that Plaisir de Merle journey, and loads of great content with plenty more of us on African wine estates and brands coming up over the coming weeks. Huge thank you there to Nora and Victor from Delheim, to Johan from Simonsig and Jacques from Spier, sharing with us some wonderful stories and the great history that is Stellenbosch Wine Routes. Thank you all for watching. This is Dan Really Likes Wine, presented by Pick and Pay. We'll see you back again live on Thursday at Plaisir de Merle. Goodbye.